Welcome to Sleepy Crimes. I am Anna, your host. Tonight, we drift into the shadows of the disappearance of Lars Mittank. Imagine, if you will, the final days of June in the year 2014. In the small German town of Marne, the air is mild and familiar, but for 28-year-old Lars Mittank, the horizon is about to expand. Lars is a man of steady habits, a power plant technician known for his calm demeanor and his reliability. He is a son, a friend, and a traveler about to embark on a journey that should have been nothing more than a collection of sun-drenched memories. He stands in the airport, the cool, sterilized air of the terminal humming with the collective energy of hundreds of souls seeking escape. His suitcase is packed with the simple necessities of a summer holiday: light cotton t-shirts, swim trunks, and the anticipation of a week away from the hum of the power plant. Beside him are 5 of his closest friends, a brotherhood forged in the shared history of their youth. They are laughing, their voices rising above the rhythmic clicking of rolling luggage wheels on the polished floors. The date is June 30th, and the world feels wide, safe, and shimmering with possibility as they board the aircraft that will carry them toward the Black Sea. The flight is a blur of white clouds and the low, hypnotic drone of jet engines. From the window, Lars watches the landscape of Europe shift from the lush greens of the north to the rugged, sun-baked textures of the east. When the plane finally touches down at Varna Airport in Bulgaria, the doors open to reveal a heat so thick and vibrant it feels like a physical embrace. It is a dry, golden heat, smelling of jet fuel, wild grass, and the distant, salt-heavy breath of the sea. The group moves through the terminal, their footsteps echoing against the high ceilings, until they emerge into the brilliant Bulgarian afternoon. They board a bus destined for the Golden Sands, a resort often whispered about as the Ibiza of the Black Sea. As the bus winds along the coastline, Lars gazes out at the water. The Black Sea is not black at all. Under the midday sun, it is a deep, sparkling turquoise that stretches out until it dissolves into a pale blue haze at the horizon. The bus rattles over sun-cracked asphalt, passing rows of ancient trees and modern hotels, until they arrive at their destination, the Hotel Viva Club. The Hotel Viva Club is a sanctuary of whitewashed stone and glass, surrounded by lush gardens and the constant, rhythmic chirping of cicadas hiding in the shade. The lobby is cool, the air smelling of floor wax and the faint, sweet scent of tropical air freshener. After checking in, the friends find their way to their rooms. The floors are tiled in a pale, sandy ceramic that feels cool beneath their feet after the heat of the journey. Lars steps out onto the balcony, the metal railing warm under his palms. Below him, the resort is a hive of activity. He can see the blue rectangle of the hotel pool, the water disturbed by the graceful arcs of swimmers, and beyond that, the endless stretch of the beach. The sand here is fine and pale, almost white, earning the region its name. For the first few days, the vacation unfolds exactly as a summer holiday should. There is no urgency, no shadow. They spend their mornings on the beach, the sand gritty and warm between their toes. Lars is relaxed, his friends would later recall. He is in a good mood, partaking in the simple joy of the sun on his skin and the sound of the waves collapsing softly against the shore in a never-ending cycle of white foam. The group dynamic is easy and full of light-hearted competition. They find a patch of sand to play football, the ball thudding against their feet, the salt spray cooling their heated skin. Lars is a passionate fan of the sport, a loyal supporter of SV Werder Bremen. He carries this passion with him like a badge of honor, often seen in his green and white colors. In the afternoons, they retreat to the shade of the beach bars, where the condensation on cold glass bottles of beer leaves rings on the wooden tables. They talk about the future, about their jobs back in Germany, and about the World Cup matches that are captivating the globe that summer. The air in the Golden Sands is constantly filled with music, a distant, pulsing bass from the beach clubs that seems to synchronize with the heartbeat of the resort. As the sun begins its slow descent each evening, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, the group prepares for the night. They walk through the neon-lit streets, where the scent of grilled meats and sugary crepes wafts from street stalls. At this stage, there is nothing to suggest that Lars is anything other than a young man enjoying the peak of his life, surrounded by the people who know him best. But as the week progresses, the atmosphere of the resort begins to shift subtly for Lars. The Golden Sands is a place of extremes. By day, it is a sun-soaked paradise, but by night, it transforms into a dizzying kaleidoscope of flashing lights and crowded corridors. The crowds grow denser as the weekend approaches. Thousands of tourists from all over Europe descend upon the narrow streets, their voices a cacophony of different languages. Lars, usually so calm, begins to seem more observant, perhaps a little more quiet than usual. One afternoon, he is seen eating only small portions, a light salad, a bowl of soup, as if his appetite is being slowly constricted by something unseen. On the evening of July 6th, the air feels particularly heavy, thick with humidity that clings to the skin like a damp veil. The group decides to head out to a bar to watch the football. It is the height of the tournament season, and tensions among fans are simmering just beneath the surface of the festive atmosphere. They find a spot in a crowded venue, the flickering light of the television screens reflecting in their eyes. The smell of tobacco smoke and spilled alcohol is pervasive. It is here, amidst the shouting fans and the rhythmic thumping of the music, that the first crack in the foundation of their holiday appears. A disagreement begins, a trivial argument over rival teams, but in the heat of the Bulgarian night, trivial things can quickly become dangerous. The salt-heavy air of the Black Sea coast usually carries a sense of freedom, but as the evening of July 6th, 2014, began to settle over the resort, the atmosphere grew thick and stagnant. Lars and his friends were caught in the rhythmic pulse of the Golden Sands nightlife, a world of neon signs that hummed with a low electric buzz and the distant, chaotic symphony of bass-heavy music. They had found themselves in a bar, the air smelling of spilled lager and sweat, where the conversation eventually turned to the tribal loyalties of German football. Lars, a dedicated supporter of SV Werder Bremen, found himself at odds with a group of other tourists who wore the colors of Bayern Munich. It was a disagreement that started with typical bravado, the kind of boisterous, prideful shouting that often defines the edges of a holiday night. But for Lars, the energy in the room began to feel jagged. When the group decided to seek out food at a local fast food restaurant, the tension followed them into the street like a shadow. Lars told his friends he was not hungry, choosing to wait outside in the humid darkness while they went inside. He stood under the flickering lights of the promenade, the sound of the ocean, a rhythmic, distant pulse, unaware that the silence of the night was about to be shattered. The violence was sudden, stripped of any cinematic grace. Out of the periphery of the dim streetlights, a group of men emerged. Some accounts say they were the same fans from the bar, while others suggest they were locals hired to finish the dispute. Before Lars could react, the world tilted. A heavy blow landed against the side of his head, a dull, sickening thud that vibrated through his skull and into the very center of his equilibrium. There was a sensation of a wet snap deep inside his ear, followed by a high, piercing whistle that seemed to drown out the sounds of the resort. He felt the cold pavement against his palms as he fell, the rough texture of the stones pressing into his skin. When he finally returned to his friends the next morning, he was changed. His jaw was tight, locked with a dull, throbbing pain that made speaking an effort, and the world sounded muffled, as if he were listening to life through a thick veil of water. He described the attack with a strange, detached gravity, telling his companions that he had been beaten, that his ear felt as though it were filled with a cold, heavy pressure that refused to subside. The carefree vacation had ended in that one sharp moment of impact, replaced by a physical vulnerability that would soon grow into something far more unsettling. By the morning of July 7th, the urgency of their departure began to loom. The group made their way to a local medical clinic, a place where the air was sterile and smelled of sharp antiseptic and old floor wax. The doctor who examined Lars worked with a practiced, clinical detachment, peering into the ear canal with a small, bright light that made Lars wince. The diagnosis was clear: a ruptured eardrum. The delicate membrane had been torn by the force of the strike, leaving the inner workings of his ear exposed and sensitive. The doctor's voice was calm, but firm as he delivered the news that would alter everything. He explained that flying was out of the question. The shifts in cabin pressure, the invisible weight of the atmosphere pressing against the cabin walls as the plane climbed thousands of feet into the sky, would cause excruciating pain and could lead to permanent, severe damage. To combat potential infection, the doctor reached for a prescription pad, his pen scratching rhythmically against the paper. He prescribed 500 milligrams of an antibiotic called cefuroxime. Lars held the small slip of paper in his hands, the ink still fresh, as the realization set in that his journey home would not begin with the others. He was now a prisoner of his own injury, anchored to the Bulgarian coast by the very air pressure that usually carried him home. The farewell at the airport was a quiet, heavy affair. His friends stood with their luggage, the wheels of their suitcases clicking rhythmically against the polished tile floor, looking at Lars with a mixture of concern and hesitation. They offered to stay behind, to wait the extra days until his ear had healed enough for the journey, but Lars was insistent. He stood there, a solitary figure in his yellow t-shirt and denim shorts, and told them to go. He assured them he was fine, that he would find a place to stay nearby and catch a flight in just 24 or 48 hours. As they walked toward the security gate, disappearing into the crowd of travelers, the sound of their voices was swallowed by the vast, echoing space of the terminal. Lars was left alone in a country where he did not speak the language, his only companion the constant, low-frequency ringing in his injured ear. He checked into a small, budget establishment called the Hotel Color, located in a less frequented part of Varna. The room was simple, almost Spartan, with thin curtains that failed to block out the shifting lights of the city outside. As the door clicked shut behind him, the silence of the room was absolute, yet for Lars, the silence was no longer peaceful. It was a vacuum, waiting to be filled by the first whispers of a fear he could not yet name. The taxi pulled away from the curb, its exhaust leaving a faint, acrid mist that hung in the humid night air of Varna. Lars stood on the uneven pavement, his fingers white-knuckled as they gripped the handle of his suitcase. Ahead, the Hotel Color loomed, not with the neon promise of the Golden Sands resorts, but with a quiet, unsettling gravity. The street was narrow, the asphalt cracked and worn, casting long, jagged shadows under the flickering amber glow of the streetlights. This was a different side of Bulgaria, far from the polished marble of the tourist traps. Here, the air felt heavier, smelling of salt, wet concrete, and the lingering scent of charcoal from a nearby vendor. He looked down the street, his eyes darting toward the dark entrances of the shops across the way. He thought he saw figures shifting in the darkness, the silhouettes of men watching from the shadows of the Kolhozen Pazar market. His heart hammered against his ribs, a rhythmic, frantic thud that echoed in his injured ear. Every sound was amplified: the distant bark of a stray dog, the metallic scrape of a shutter being pulled down, the low hum of an air conditioner. He hurried toward the hotel entrance, the glass door reflecting a version of himself he hardly recognized, wide-eyed, pale, and vibrating with an electric, unshakable dread. Inside, the lobby was small and dimly lit, the floor covered in tiles that hummed beneath his feet. The check-in process felt like a blur of movement and mounting suspicion. When the clerk behind the desk took his credit card to make a photocopy, Lars felt a cold shiver slide down his spine. He watched the machine hiss as it dragged the paper through, the bright light of the scanner flashing like a warning signal. To Lars, it wasn't a standard procedure. It was a theft of his identity, a way for them to track him, to trap him. He took the key and retreated to the elevator, the small metal box groaning as it ascended. The walls of the lift were scratched, etched with the names of travelers who had long since moved on. He reached his floor and hurried down the hallway, the carpet beneath him thin and stained. He found his room and stepped inside, the door clicking shut with a sharp, final sound that felt like the closing of a tomb. The room was bathed in a sickly yellow light from a single lamp. The air was stagnant, tasting of old cigarettes and industrial lavender. He didn't unpack. He simply stood in the center of the room, listening to the silence, waiting for the shadows to move. The paranoia began to bloom like a dark flower in the heat of the night. He paced the small perimeter of the room, his footsteps muffled by the threadbare rug. Every few minutes, he would lean his head against the door, pressing his good ear to the wood, straining to hear the soft scuff of footsteps in the hallway. He was certain he heard whispering, low, guttural voices discussing his name, his room, his life. He went to the window and pulled the curtain back just a fraction of an inch. Below, the street was a canyon of ink, but his mind populated it with enemies. He saw them in the way the streetlights cast long, reaching fingers across the pavement. He was convinced that 4 men were coming for him, the same men from the beach, or perhaps their associates. The antibiotic he was supposed to take, cefprozil, sat on the nightstand, unopened. Some say the drug can cause rare side effects, a fracturing of the psyche, but the doctors later claimed he never even filled the prescription. This fear was raw, unmedicated, and absolute. It was a terror that lived in the marrow of his bones, a conviction that the world had turned into a predatory machine designed to swallow him whole. At 11 o'clock that night, the silence became too much to bear. He reached for his phone, his thumb trembling as he scrolled to his mother's name. When Sandra answered, thousands of miles away in Germany, she was met with a voice she didn't recognize as her son's. Lars was whispering, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the static of the international line. He told her she must cancel his credit cards immediately. He told her the hotel was not safe, that people were watching him, that the clerk had stolen his information. Sandra tried to soothe him, her voice a calm anchor in his storm, but Lars was beyond the reach of reason. He described the 4 men who were hunting him, their intentions dark and violent. He spoke of the danger as if it were standing right behind him, breathing down his neck. Sandra could hear the frantic rhythm of his breathing, the way his words tumbled over one another in a rush of panic. She promised to do as he asked, but the fear in his voice stayed with her, a cold weight in the pit of her stomach. He hung up abruptly, leaving her alone in the quiet of her German home, while he remained trapped in a yellow-lit room in Varna, watching the door handle for the slightest sign of movement. The hours that followed were a descent into a private hell. Security footage from the hotel color, though grainy and flickering, captured the ghost of a man. Lars was seen pacing the corridors, his back pressed against the wall as he slunk past the doors of other guests. He would peer out of the windows at the end of the hall, his face a mask of desperation. At one point, he retreated into the elevator, not to go to another floor, but to hide, crouching in the corner as the doors opened and closed on empty hallways. Around 1 in the morning, the pressure became unbearable. He fled the hotel entirely, disappearing into the dark streets of Varna for an entire hour. No one knows where he went or what he saw in that hour of wandering. Did he hide in the shadows of the market? Did he see the men he feared? When he returned, he was even more agitated, his clothes slightly disheveled, his eyes wide and unfocused. He made another call to Sandra, his voice now a mere thread of sound. He told her the men were closing in. He said they were almost there. He spent the rest of the night as a sentinel, standing in the dark, watching the door, waiting for the sun to rise so he could make one final run for the airport, convinced that only the sky could save him. The morning of July 8th, 2014, broke with a heavy, salt-tinged humidity that seemed to weigh upon the very air of the Bulgarian coast. Lars sat in the back of a taxi, his eyes fixed on the blurring landscape of Varna as it rushed past the window in a smear of sun-bleached concrete and dusty greens. The car smelled of old upholstery and tobacco, a sharp, suffocating contrast to the cold, antiseptic sting of the hotel he had just fled. As the taxi pulled up to the curb of Varna Airport, the terminal stood as a gleaming, glass and steel monolith against the pale, shimmering sky. Lars stepped out of the vehicle, the sudden heat of the morning pressing against his skin like a heavy, physical hand. He hoisted his rucksack and a secondary travel bag, the weight of them pulling at his shoulders, a final anchor to his life in Germany. Inside the terminal, the air was a different world, chilled by the constant, low-frequency hum of industrial air conditioning, and filled with the rhythmic, hollow clicking of hundreds of rolling suitcases on the polished stone floors. He was a man adrift in a sea of travelers, each one a stranger, each one a potential shadow in the fractured landscape of his mind. He navigated the cavernous hall toward the medical wing, his heart a frantic, uneven beat that pulsed painfully against the interior of his chest. The office of Dr. Kostov was a small, sterile sanctuary tucked away from the main bustle of the departures area. Inside, the walls were a stark, unforgiving white, and the air smelled of rubbing alcohol and sharp, medicinal soaps that seemed to catch in the back of his throat. Lars sat on the edge of the examination chair, the crinkled sanitary paper beneath him making a sound like dying leaves every time he shifted his weight. Dr. Kostov was a man of quiet, practiced efficiency, his movements slow and deliberate as he prepared to assess the young traveler. He observed the man before him, the dilated pupils, the trembling fingers, and the visible layer of sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. The doctor moved closer, the soft, rhythmic squeak of his rubber-soled shoes the only sound in the small space. He reached out to inspect the injured ear, and for a moment, the world narrowed down to the touch of cold instruments and the internal roar of the pressure behind Lars's ruptured eardrum. The consultation proceeded with a slow, agonizing deliberation that felt like hours to the man in the chair. The doctor explained the inherent risks of the flight home, the way the cabin pressure could aggravate the perforation, and the absolute necessity of a signed waiver of responsibility. Lars listened, but his attention was elsewhere, darting toward the corners of the room and the heavy, closed door that separated this small space from the relative safety of the public terminal. He had the cefuroxime 500 in his system, or perhaps the fear of the medication was what truly haunted him now. The paranoia that had been a low, vibrating hum in the hotel halls now surged into a deafening, internal scream. When the door to the office finally opened, it wasn't a shadow or a ghost that entered, but a simple construction worker in a bright, neon-reflective vest. The airport was undergoing renovations, a mundane fact of logistics, but to Lars, this figure was a harbinger of something far more sinister. The neon yellow of the vest seemed to vibrate in the sterile light of the office, a visual siren that finally shattered the last of his composure. "I don't want to die here," Lars shouted, the words tearing from his throat with a raw, primal desperation that silenced the room and froze the doctor in place. "I have to get out of here." He stood up so abruptly that the examination chair skidded backward, its metal legs shrieking against the tile floor. In that single, frantic motion, he abandoned every physical object that tied him to his life, his family, and his future. His rucksack, containing his clothing and personal effects, remained slumped on the floor like a discarded skin. His wallet, his passport, and his mobile phone, the very tools of his identity and his connection to the world, were left sitting on the doctor's desk like relics of a man who no longer existed. He didn't look back to see the doctor's confusion. He burst through the office door and into the main hall of the terminal, his sneakers slapping against the floor in a rapid, staccato rhythm that cut through the low murmur of the airport. He was a blur of yellow fabric and desperate motion, a man running toward an exit that offered no promise of safety, only an escape from the walls closing in around him. The security footage from that final moment is haunting in its clarity and its lack of context. It captures Lars sprinting through the terminal, his arms pumping at his sides, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He wove through groups of confused tourists and airport staff, a ghost in broad daylight moving at a speed that suggested a life-or-death pursuit only he could see. He burst through the sliding exit doors and into the blinding, white glare of the afternoon sun. The heat hit him again, a wall of warmth, but he didn't slow his pace. He ran across the burning asphalt of the parking lots and the service roads, his feet hitting the ground with a desperate force that seemed to ignore the physical toll on his body. He wasn't running toward a taxi, a bus, or any form of transportation. He was running toward the perimeter, toward the edge of the structured, civilized world. The airport fence stood 10 feet high, a barrier of chain link topped with coils of jagged, silver barbed wire that glinted like teeth in the sun. He didn't hesitate. He began to climb, his fingers gripping the cold metal, his body straining as he pulled himself over the top of the barrier. He cleared the wire, his clothes snagging for a brief, frantic second before he dropped to the dusty earth on the other side. Beyond the fence lay the vast, shimmering expanse of the Bulgarian countryside, specifically, a massive, endless field of sunflowers. The stalks stood tall and thick, their heavy golden heads bowing slightly under the weight of the summer heat, creating a dense sea of yellow and green that stretched toward the distant horizon. Lars scrambled to his feet, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps, and began to run into the heart of the field. Within seconds, the tall, swaying plants swallowed him whole. The bright yellow of his shirt flickered between the stalks for a few more strides before it vanished completely into the greenery. The sound of the airport, the jet engines, the voices of travelers, the life he had known, faded away into the distance, replaced by the dry, rhythmic rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of insects in the midday heat. Lars Mittank walked into the golden stillness of the field, leaving the world behind, and the shadows of Varna took him forever. Sunflower Field, a vast, undulating sea of gold that stretched toward the horizon under the relentless heat of the Bulgarian morning. As Lars hit the ground, the impact sent a dull thud through the dry earth, a sound swallowed instantly by the wide, open space. He did not look back. He did not pause to catch his breath or to steady the frantic rhythm of his heart. Instead, he plunged forward, his body lean and desperate, moving with a singular, terrifying purpose. The transition from the structured world of the airport, with its asphalt, its painted lines, and its security checkpoints, to this wild, unmanicured landscape was instantaneous. The ground beneath his white sneakers was no longer smooth and predictable. It was uneven, choked with weeds and the debris of a summer that had baked the land into a brittle crust. Each step he took kicked up a fine, pale dust that clung to his ankles, a ghostly trail marking his path for only a few seconds before the breeze carried it away. He was heading northwest, moving away from the safety of the terminal and deeper into the silence of the countryside. The sunflowers were in their full, midsummer glory, standing nearly 6 feet tall. They were an army of vibrant yellow heads, all turned toward the sun that hung high in the sky at 10 o'clock in the morning. To a casual observer, the field might have seemed beautiful, a picture of pastoral peace on the edge of a bustling transport hub. But to Lars, these stalks were a wall, a thicket of rough, hairy stems and broad, sandpaper-textured leaves. As he broke into the first row of plants, the sound changed. The open air was replaced by the dry, papery rattle of leaves brushing against his skin. The stalks were thick, some as wide as a man's wrist, and they did not yield easily. He had to push through them, his yellow t-shirt snagging on the coarse foliage, the bright fabric momentarily blending with the golden petals of the flowers. It was as if the landscape itself was trying to claim him, to pull the yellow of his clothing into the yellow of the field, until there was no distinction between the man and the flora. The air within the field was heavy and still, smelling of green vegetation and sun-scorched earth, a suffocating contrast to the sterilized, recycled air of the airport medical room he had fled only minutes before. On the security cameras of Varna Airport, the footage of this moment is hauntingly clinical. The lens is fixed, capturing the scene in a grainy, high-angle perspective that makes the world look distant and detached. We see the perimeter fence, a silver line of chain link and barbed wire that marks the boundary of authority. We see the figure of a 28-year-old man, a speck of bright yellow and blue denim, moving across the frame with a fluid, animalistic speed. The camera does not blink. It records the way his body tenses as he approaches the 8-foot barrier, the way his hands find purchase on the wire, and the way he heaves himself over with a strength born of pure adrenaline. There is a strange, quiet violence to the movement. In the footage, there is no one behind him. The parking lot is empty. The terminal doors behind him remain closed. No shadow looms in the corner of the frame. No vehicle pursues him across the lot. He is running from something that the camera cannot see, a phantom that exists only in the spaces between the frames or perhaps deep within the fractures of his own mind. As investigators and thousands of online viewers would later note, the most chilling aspect of the video is the moment of vanishing. Lars does not simply run into the field, he is consumed by it. One moment he is a visible, moving entity, his yellow shirt a beacon against the green stalks. He takes 3, 4, 5 long strides into the dense rows, and then, as if a curtain has been drawn, he is gone. The height of the sunflowers, standing nearly 2 meters tall, makes it impossible to track his movement once he moves past the outer edge. The camera continues to roll, recording the static scene of the field. The golden heads of the flowers nod slightly in the wind, a slow and rhythmic motion that feels mocking in its indifference. There is no shaking of the stalks to indicate where he is pushing through. There is no parting of the leaves. It is as if he stepped into the field and simply ceased to have a physical form. The viewer is left staring at a landscape that looks exactly as it did before he arrived, save for the knowledge that a human being has just dissolved into the sea of gold. The heat of that day, July 8th, 2014, was oppressive. The temperature was climbing toward 30 degrees Celsius, and the sun was a bright, searing eye in a cloudless Bulgarian sky. Inside the field, the humidity would have been intense, trapped by the canopy of broad leaves. Lars, without his backpack, without his wallet, and most crucially, without his water, was moving into a terrain that offered no mercy. Beyond the sunflowers lay the 82 National Highway, a ribbon of asphalt where cars and trucks thundered past, their drivers oblivious to the man struggling through the vegetation just yards away. Beyond that highway lay a dense forest, a dark green smudge on the horizon that promised even deeper shadows and more profound isolation. As he pushed deeper, the scratches on his arms and legs from the rough sunflower stalks would have begun to sting. The sweat on his brow would have begun to burn his eyes, but the inner drive, that primal, frantic need to escape, seemed to override every physical sensation of pain or fatigue. He was a man in the grip of a total psychological storm, navigating a world where every rustle of a leaf was a footstep and every shadow was a threat. In the airport terminal, his luggage remained on the floor of the doctor's office. His passport, the document that defined his identity and his right to return home to Germany, sat inside his bag, untouched. His mobile phone, the device that had carried his whispered pleas for help to his mother only hours before, was silent and abandoned. He had left behind every tether to the life he knew. He was now just a body moving through a landscape, stripped of his name, his history, and his destination. The CCTV footage ends shortly after his disappearance into the stalks, looping back to the beginning of the day or cutting to another sterile hallway. But in the minds of those who watch it, the footage never truly stops. It remains frozen at that last glimpse of yellow fabric, that final moment where Lars Mittank was still visible to the world. The silence that followed his entry into the sunflowers was not a brief pause. It was the beginning of a void that has lasted for more than a decade. The gold of the field remained bright, the sun continued its slow arc across the sky, and the sunflowers kept their faces turned toward the light, keeping their secrets buried deep within the rows. The morning of July 8th, 2014, was thick with the humid, salt-tinged air of the Black Sea. In the distance, the city of Varna stirred with the sounds of the coming day, but at the edge of the airport, a different kind of silence had taken root. This was the moment Lars vanished, leaving behind the heavy thrum of the terminal for the sharp, dry rustle of the Bulgarian wilderness. Outside the perimeter, the landscape was dominated by vast, swaying fields of sunflowers, their golden heads heavy and bowing under the weight of the summer heat. Beyond them lay a dense, tangled forest where the shadows were long and the earth was cool. When the search teams arrived, they brought with them the low, rhythmic baying of bloodhounds, their noses pressed into the dusty soil, searching for the scent of a man who had seemingly evaporated. The investigator, Andreas Gudig, walked these same paths, his boots crunching over the dry brush, his eyes scanning the horizon for a flash of yellow fabric or a scrap of denim. He looked into abandoned buildings where the plaster crumbled like sugar and into deep, dark wells where the water sat stagnant and silent. But the dogs always stopped at the same point, near the edge of the woods, where the wind carried nothing but the scent of pine and the distant, lonely cry of a bird. The earth held its secrets tight, refusing to yield a single footprint or a clue to the direction Lars had taken in those final, frantic moments of his flight. Far away in the quiet, gray-toned town of Itzehoe, Germany, a mother named Sandra Mittank sat in a room filled with the soft, blue glow of a computer screen. The distance between Varna and home felt like an ocean, vast and impossible to cross. She had spent years turning over the smallest details, her fingers tracing the edges of missing person posters, until the paper became soft and worn. She built a community of thousands online, a digital watchfire intended to light her son's way home. Every notification on her phone was a heartbeat of hope, followed by the cold, heavy realization of another lead gone dark. She thought of the special bond they shared, the way he would help his father after a stroke, and the quiet, steady life he led at the power plant. To the world, Lars was a mystery to be solved, but to her, he was the boy who loved football and the man who always called home. She imagined him somewhere, perhaps sitting on a park bench in a city he didn't recognize, his memory a blank slate wiped clean by the trauma of that night. She pictured the texture of his dark blonde hair and the specific curve of the scar on his left forearm, holding these images in her mind like a prayer against the passing of time. 10 years is a long time to keep a light burning, yet the flame of her devotion never flickered, even as the world around her moved on into a new decade. The theories surrounding his disappearance are like a maze with no exit, each turn leading into a new shadow. Some point to the 500 milligrams of cefuroxime, an antibiotic meant to protect his ruptured ear, but perhaps capable of unraveling the delicate chemistry of his mind. They speak of a rare, chemical-induced psychosis, a storm of paranoia that turned friendly faces into monsters and the airport terminal into a trap. Others look back to the night of the fight, the heated argument over soccer clubs, where Werder Bremen fans clashed with supporters of Bayern Munich. Was there a hidden injury, a slow bleed within the skull that clouded his judgment and sent him running from a threat only he could see? Darker whispers suggest he fell victim to the underbelly of a foreign land, caught in the gears of human trafficking or organ harvesting, though no evidence has ever emerged to support such a grim fate. There are those who believe he chose to disappear, shedding his identity like a heavy coat and stepping into a new life as a wanderer, free from the expectations of the world he left behind. The silence of the Bulgarian police and the lack of hospital records only added to the mystery, creating a vacuum that the internet was more than happy to fill with speculation, turning a single man's tragedy into a collective puzzle for millions of amateur sleuths around the globe. Today, Lars Mittank exists as a digital ghost, a permanent fixture of the internet's dark folklore. He is known as the most famous missing person on YouTube, a title earned through the relentless looping of those final 30 seconds of CCTV footage. Over 16 million people have watched that grainy, yellow-shirted figure sprint toward the horizon, their eyes searching for a detail that everyone else might have missed. They pause on the moment he stops outside the terminal doors, looking left then right, his posture taut with a primal fear. They analyze the way he scales the 8-foot wire fence with the agility of a man possessed, disappearing into the green blur of the meadow beyond. This video has become a modern campfire story, shared in the middle of the night by people who feel a strange, haunting connection to the man in the yellow shirt. The screen creates a distance, making his terror feel like a scene from a movie, yet the reality remains as cold and hard as the airport floor. He is a person, not a character, yet his image has been decentralized, woven into the fabric of true crime culture until the human being at the center is almost lost. We watch him run over and over again, but he never reaches his destination, and the video never provides the ending we so desperately crave. He is frozen in that sprint, a snapshot of a man on the edge of the world. Occasionally, the world offers a flicker of a ghost. In 2016, a disoriented man was found walking barefoot along a highway in Brazil, thousands of miles from the Black Sea. For a few breathless days, the internet convinced itself that Lars had finally surfaced, but the man was later identified as a missing Canadian. In 2019, a truck driver in Germany claimed he gave a ride to a hitchhiker with hollow cheeks and tired eyes who looked like an older, gaunt version of the boy from Itzehoe. These sightings are like echoes in a canyon, fading into nothingness before they can be grasped. We are left with the image of the sunflower fields in the summer of 2014, the heat haze rising off the asphalt, and the luggage sitting unclaimed in a doctor's office. The mystery of Lars Mittank does not end with a resolution, but with a question that lingers in the quiet hours of the night. Where does a man go when he runs away from himself? Perhaps he is still out there, a wanderer under a different name, or perhaps he found peace in the silence of the Bulgarian woods. The case rests now. Let the details fade. You are safe. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and have a good night. Sleep well.